I'm head of analytics at DUPR. We've just changed the algorithm as of around June of this year. So there's some new things in play that some of your listeners may or may not be familiar with. What it used to be was this black box that updated weekly.
Why does DUPR not consider two different ratings between mixed and non-mixed? People also complained that they wouldn't play and their rating would change.
And again, this is all in the past. This is historical. Why would I have gone up? Well, I would have gone up without playing because you went up. And your match against me was part of information.
A lot of people didn't ever understand that exact example.
And people, especially people, are fine if their rating goes up without knowing. It's when it goes down, right? You won't move if you don't play, right? Your rating moves when you play. That's the only time your rating is going to move. Before, your rating could move all around. The way that this works, your DUPR score will go up if you win. It'll go down if you lose. If you win in an upset, you'll go up by more than if you win in a expected result. You know, the new app is going to show you this was your rating before, this was the rating change, this is your rating after. And we have that new chart that we've outlined on there as well to show you that progress over time. So we released this tool called the Genie tool, but this tool allows you to, theory craft. It lets you play around with, if I beat this person, if they played against each other, right? What would be the outcome? How much would each of us go up? How much would each of us go down? Okay.
But just to be clear, but in the past, if we played and I beat you just by a little, my rating could have gone down, or
could have gone down. Yes.
Right. And you may go back to that eventually once you can publish the predicted results.
You can have my job.
Welcome to Pickleball is Life. If you like these videos, all I ask is that you please press the red subscribe button on the bottom right. It won't cost you anything.
Hi, Scott Mendelssohn. You're a DUPR representative to allow us to talk about DUPR ratings. What's your title there at DUPR?
Hey, yeah. So I'm head of analytics at DUPR, relatively recently formed title, but focusing on all things data, all things analytics, trying to understand what this whole pickleball ecosystem looks like when you boil it down to numbers. So yeah, I've been doing this for a handful of months now. Excited to have this conversation with you.
Do you play pickleball?
So funny story, I got brought into this, former colleague was the interim CEO of Major League Pickleball. I worked with him back in the day, and he convinced me to do this. He said, this sounds like a lot of fun. Data-wise, a lot of fun. I had never played. So I started looking at the numbers, and then I'm like, hey, this actually seems like it's kind of fun. I started playing. I got my paddle. I got my nets. I got like 40 X40 balls like littered throughout my things. I'm full in, committed now.
Cool.
Yeah, it started with numbers, and then it became an actual thing I really enjoy.
So why don't we start with a simple premise of how DUPR calculates a rating, I guess, given a particular match. Want to just start with the basics?
So we've just changed the algorithm as of around June of this year. So there's some new things in play that some of your listeners may or may not be familiar with. Part of why I'm so excited to do this call with you and have this interview is because I think we could have done a lot better being way more transparent, way more out there to discuss these changes beforehand so people felt comfortable moving in. We felt we had to act quickly, and so we made some decisions that we thought were in the best interest of everybody. And I think what we're learning is that this community is so informed about play and how they feel about it and how this all works, and they have so many opinions that we really should have gotten out there sooner and faster. And so this is the process that we're starting here. So
is the way that the ratings algorithm, by the way,
I can't say it's the first time because I didn't start at the very beginning. This is the first major change.
Okay.
And the kind of focus of this change was twofold. And maybe I'll sort of start by inspiring it, and then we'll kind of get into what actually is happening. Okay. But what it used to be was this black box that updated weekly. You'd log in every Tuesday if you were lucky and all the data was working out from the past weekend. But let's say every Tuesday you'd log in, you'd see your new rating, and then you wouldn't get to see anything until next week. Your new rating would come up, and it would look at all these different factors, compute this huge web of information, and then just tell you your number without any transparency whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
You might remember that. You might have remembered feeling frustrated about that. A lot of people did. The fact that these ratings were getting updated without any information to the individuals about why, the detailed description of what's going on. We believed a lot in its predictive accuracy, but we did not believe that it was giving people a great experience when it came to they play a match, they enter their match, and then nothing happens. They don't see their rating change. They don't get information about what's supposed to happen if they win, supposed to happen if they lose. So what we did was we moved it to...
Before you go there, because that's on the same
Yeah.
topic, people also complained that they wouldn't play and their rating would change.
Exactly.
Was
So
that
think about that
occurring
like
before?
this, right? So that's no longer the case. And that was also a big concern that we wanted to address. So the big topic is kind of summarized into one statement, which is you won't move if you don't play, right? Your rating moves when you play. That's the only time your rating is going to move. Before, your rating could move all around. And so why would a rating move in the past when we didn't play? Because I think it's actually kind of interesting to know about. And because I think that also informs the complexity we'd like to put back into the system with an emphasis on transparency. We want to make sure where we go is being led with like a flashlight going down the cave. Like everyone's coming on this journey with us. We don't want to just jump to the end result and have everyone surprised. So why might a rating change historically in the past? Not right now. Why might it have changed without play? So let's say we played, and let's say we were both. What's your DUPR score, if you don't mind my asking?
431, I believe.
431. Great. So let's say you're a 431, and I'm playing you, and I'm, let's say, a 4. That's probably generous for me. As we said, I started with the numbers, and I'm working my way up. I'm 3-7. I could probably hang. So let's say I'm a 4. You're a 4-3. We play, and you beat me up pretty good, right? Let's now say that 2 months later, we realize you aren't a 4-3. You're actually way, way, way better, right? You're actually a 4-7, let's say, right? Let's say you've had a great series of tournaments. You've really cleaned up. You've medaled in a few, 4-5, 5-0s even. Right?
I could have improved over that time.
So me losing to you is maybe I lost to you before you improved. Or maybe it's I was the first person to lose to a much improved version of you, right? Maybe you, when you beat me, were actually this 4-7 that you are now. Right. And so my rating is going to go up, even though I lost to you. And again, this is all in the past. This is historical. Why would I have gone up? Well, I would have gone up without playing because you went up. And your match against me was part of information.
A lot of people didn't ever understand that exact example. And
people, especially, people are fine if their rating goes up without knowing. It's when it goes down, right? Of course, that's a very obvious thing, but it's not something that's easily, this is an early stage company back when this algorithm was being created. The understanding of it being a client service company, right? A technology service company, it's not very clear. So you do things that you think are going to maximize predictive quality without thinking about the way that it's going to affect the users. So what we did is we flipped that on its head, and some might argue and have argued that it's maybe too much of a reversal, but now we've gone with transparency first. So right now, the score, the way that this works, your DUPR score will go up if you win, it'll go down if you lose. If you win in an upset, you'll go up by more than if you win in a expected result. If you're a 4-3 and I'm a 3-5 and you beat me, that doesn't really tell us anything about either of our ratings. You were supposed to have beaten me.
Just to clarify, my DUPR goes up if I win by more than what is predicted, or it goes up if I win no matter what?
That's also a great question, because right now we do not tell people before their match that this is the score that they're expected to get. And because we are not currently telling them that, and it's not being made public, we are not scoring people on that. We're not going to do that. Right? The thing that we want is transparency. And the way that transparency can affect the users is if they know before the match, if I score this much, then I will go up this much, right? If you beat me 11-8, you go up. If you beat me 11-9, I go up, right? That type of thing we want to get back to, but we will not get back to it until we can provide that transparency before a match. Because people were frustrated. They'd say, I won 11-9. What do you mean? And it's like, well, you were supposed to win 11-8. Right? We need to put that out there, because otherwise people are going to get frustrated. They're not going to have expectations.
Were you doing that before?
No, that was never public. That was never available for. And a lot of matches.
No, but were you adjusting scores based upon the predictive result versus?
Yes, the old algorithm was looking at scores. So it was basically saying, if you won by more than you were expected to win, or lost by less than you were expected to, then you would go up, right? If I lost 11-9 to Ben Johns, I should be feeling really good about myself. But the problem is nobody knew what that value was.
Right.
So it caused as much frustration as, well, why did my score go up if I didn't play, right? Why did I win and go down?
Right.
If you don't know beforehand what's going to happen or how that's going to affect
Now, you
you,
may
you're
not
liable to
go
be
if
frustrated.
you play a real weak player, so let's say we play and you are really a 3-6 or something, and I happen to be a 4-3, and I beat you. Will I go up less because I'm playing a
Yes,
weak player?
right.
So there's a little
And
bit of
I'll go down
predictive.
very small, right? But if
Okay.
I was to beat you, whoa, that's a huge piece of news. That's a lot of information. But you were expected to beat me. So you beating me is only going to marginally increase your rating. And the further and further and further apart we get, the less and less it's going to affect your rating.
Right.
And eventually it's going to get below the rounding point, right? You're going to not see that update.
But just to be clear, but in the past, if we played and I beat you just by a little, my rating could have gone down or was
It could have gone down. Yes.
Right. And you may
And
go
so-
back to that eventually once you can publish the predicted results.
You can have my job. That's what it sounds like, because you nailed it right on the head. Like, the idea of the information needs to be available to the users because it's a client experience, it's a user experience. The information about what's going to happen, or at least the expectation, right? If you're supposed to beat me 11-7 or 11-5, let's say that you're supposed to beat me 11-5, and the score right now is 10-4, well, you need to score that point, right? Like, that becomes part of your game. Oh, this is the important point. If I don't score this, then it's going to be that Scott was able to get his expected number of points against me, and that might hurt my rating. So if you know your target, if you know your benchmark, you can operate around that. You're supposed to think every single point matters, right? And that's what we'd like people to believe. Every single point matters. You play every point out. That's not perfectly true in just a general sense. And it's also not perfectly true in the sense that, like, people have targets that they're achieving, right? They're looking to play certain ways. If you're up 10-0, you might let somebody get a point or two, right? That's not a huge factor. And so thinking about all of these different ways and how they all translate into the score is tricky. It's a math problem, it's a stats problem, but it's not something a player is going to be thinking of on the fly in their head as they're playing the match, and then coming back to it a week later when that score updates and all the other things affecting their scores in unknown ways. That's going to cause a lot of confusion. So we want to be able to say before the match, this is the score that you end up with, then this is the rating you're going to go to. Simple as that. And once we get there, then we can start bringing the scores back.
When does your DUPR rating change? Is it still a weekly change, or is it change when the match is posted?
Instantaneously upon verification of that match. So if it's a club or tournament match, the moment it hits the books. If it's a recreational match, then it's as soon as it's verified by one member of the opposing team.
So if you can see it and it's verified, of course,
yes,
right, then your rating will change.
Yes. And the new app even has, and this would be a great time to put up that graphic. The new app is going to show you, this was your rating before, this was the rating change, this is your rating after. And we have that new chart that we outlined on there as well to show you that progress over time. But as soon as that hits,
it looks like your teams go. Let's say my team went up by 0.04, the other team goes down by 0.04. Is it always the same adjustment to the two teams?
So right now it is, but we can imagine a world very soon from now in which that's not the case. And again, we need transparency beforehand. But why might a player move more than another player? Well, I've just started playing pickleball. You've been playing for a long time. And by me just started, it's been maybe something like, at this point, maybe even 8 months. But like, you've been playing for a while. The one new match that I play is going to be a lot less information, or sorry, a lot more informational. I play one match, maybe let's say I've only played 3 other matches in my life. That new one match is a quarter of the information DUPR has about me. Whereas you play one match, that's maybe 1/100th of the information DUPR has about you, right? So the amount of influence is proportional to how much information it carries. So when we played, I'm a very new player, you're a very established player. Your rating is going to move less than mine. And even if we were on the same team, that could be the case. We both win, we both go up, we both have the same performance improvements, but your rating isn't going to move by that much because you have such a long history that's established you as the level of player that you are. Whereas for me, it's going, I still need to kind of figure out what Scott is. And so that might move me around a little bit more
So is
in
that
that
in
sort of
place?
provisional stage.
Is that in place yet, or that's
Not
coming?
yet. Our expectation is this is something that's going to be released next month. And again, we want to make sure that it's transparent. So we released this tool maybe 3 or so weeks ago, beginning of this month, called the Genie tool. That's an online tool right now that's separate, and we can provide a link and put it in the comments for when this goes live. But this tool allows you to, theory craft. It lets you play around with, if I beat this person, if they played against each other, right? What would be the outcome? How much would each of us go up? How much would each of us go down? We want to make sure that that's available in app, or at least immediately available for people to look at, so that they know, if I play this match, I'll go up this much, my opponent will go up that much, or I'll go up this much, my opponent will go down this much, my partner is going to go up this much, the other team's partner is going to go down. Like, we want to make sure that it's really transparent to the users so that they go into this, think of it, it's sort of, in a way, a little bit like gambling, right? You're gambling dupers with each other. You're saying, I'm going to put 0.101 of duper on the line, and you're putting 0.01 duper, and the winner takes all, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we're blending with this idea of relative amounts of information. The more you play, the less each match matters. The longer it's been since you've played, like, let's say you don't enter any matches in duper for a year. That next match needs to carry a lot more weight, because who knows what's happened in that year, right? There's a lot more information coming. So that's where we want to get to, but we need to make sure that players are going to be able to explore and investigate that ahead of time, or else they're going to get frustrated again, because they're going to say, I won this match with my partner, and my partner went up 0.5 and I only went up 0.01. What's going on? And it's like, well, your partner, we just started seeing your partner play for the first time, right? And whereas with you, we've known that you've been at this level for quite some time.
I think that's the key. When someone sees their duper change, specifically when they're looking at the results of a match, I think it's real important to put detail behind that little edit, that little change. It's a 0.04 for me, and it's a 0.03 for my partner, and it's 0.04 and 0.05 for the other opponents. Why, right? That's what would be really nice to.
So that's interesting. And it's convenient, because I, just before joining this call with you, was on a call where we were discussing exactly how we'd outline this information. And so it sounds like what you're saying is something that is a player, maybe giving people little bits of information. And I don't want people to expect this to come out when this new, like this is, but we can add this to the queue, right? There's a huge queue. But little piece of information like, hey, this is a relatively new match for you. And it's a relatively, this player that you're playing with, this is a relatively established player. And so that's why you might move differently. Giving a little tooltip, maybe like a little thing that you can click on that expands and gives just a little bit of context over these kind of like higher level variables. You should have,
if people see different players being adjusted from a given match and it's different, they're going to want to know why.
Right.
It's just normal. Now,
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Is the weight, are the results of a match weighed differently, either by the type of match, whether it's mixed or non-mixed? Are there any other factors that go into how much a given match results could affect your duper?
So right now, the major consideration is the source of that tournament, or if it's a tournament, if it's a club, if it's a league, if it's a formal event in which a bracket has been uploaded to the system, that's going to weigh more than a recreational match played between two people and entered. One, because the nature of play in recreational is a little bit more casual. There's a little bit of, there's less stakes on the line, but also we see a lot of spoofing that we have to manage, right? So this is that balance between giving it enough weight that it can inform how you play, but not giving it so much weight that somebody can do malicious things in order to get their duper to a place where they can go sandbag a tournament, right? We want to make sure it's balancing that.
I've heard it's like 5 times. How are the weights figured? Manual versus,
so we're definitely
non-sanctioned tournament versus a sanctioned tournament. Are there?
So we would like to study that ratio for its predictive power a little bit better. So right now it's something like 5, but that could change if we get to a point where we feel that we need to weight it differently. But the thing that's going to be important is we're going to say beforehand how much you'll move up or down, and the exact combination of those weights, we might be able to provide information like, hey, this is a tournament, so it's going to be weighted a little higher, or this is a recreational, so it's going to be weighted a little lower. But the exact ratios, I think, are going to be tuned over time to what gives us the best predictive power, the best ability to catch players who are trying to manipulate the system. And then as long as we make sure that beforehand players know how much weight it has based on all of the factors put together and can make a decision about, does this make sense? Do I want to play this match, right? As long as that information is available beforehand, we have a little bit of flexibility to tune those weights to the thing that gives us the best effect over the entire community.
And those weights are just for that one given match. So if a given match is manually entered by some player, and all four, I guess, all 4 players have to approve it.
So right now, I'm pretty sure the format is one person on the opposing team needs to approve it.
Okay.
So one person enters it, and then one person on the opposing team needs to approve it. If it's being put in through a tournament or through a club or through any sort of like sanctioned official process, nobody needs to approve it. The tournament director is able to insert it directly. But for a match that's recreational, one person on the opposing team. Like you effectively choose a representative beforehand.
And if a given match that was manually entered had was causing an adjustment of like 0.02, but that same match was entered from a tournament, is it a
like
larger?
If it's a duplicate?
No, it's
okay.
I'm trying to understand what this weighting means, because I've heard the weighting concept, but would it mean that my DUPR would change more?
So right now, the way that recreational matches are evaluated and tournament matches evaluated are slightly different, because tournaments are a best of 3, best of 5, sometimes just best of 1, but like they're often played in you need to win multiple sets in order to compete, right? So the format of a tournament entered match, the whole match is calculated as one value, right? You go up or down, you can go up or down, the difference between if you win and if you lose is 0.1 right now. And again, this is something that we could be seeing changed within let's say a month's time. But right now the idea is, and again, if it's changed, you'll know beforehand how much you're going to go up or down. But right now, if you win a tournament, you'll go up, let's say 2 equal partners in a tournament, or 2 equal opponents. If one team wins, they'll go up 0.05. And if the other team loses, they'll go down 0.05, right? If you flip, because they're equal, the same ratio applies, the same amount of up or down, right? So the team that won in the first instance, they're now losing, so they go down 0.05. So the difference between where they are if they won and where they are if they lost is 0.1. Think about it again like that gambling metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. We are each putting in an amount proportional to how likely it is that we win. And the total pot is equal to 0.1 for tournaments. So if you were a heavy favorite against me, you might put in 0.7 or 0.07, and I might put in 0.03, right? So if you win, you get my 0.03, but if you lose, I get your 0.07, right? So the magnitude of the difference is 0.1 for tournaments.
Okay,
for
I'm still trying to understand the weighting factor of a manual entered result.
Right. So I'm going
to play, and the exact same match results. Versus that same 4 players playing with the same results, but it was submitted by a tournament. Okay,
so let's simplify for a second and say that this was a best of 1 set in a tournament. So 1 set, it's 11 to 5, whatever, right? It's a single match. And then 1 recreational bracket. It's a 1 game of 11 to 5. The tournament will move you, in this case, it's twice as much as the recreational play.
Okay, twice as much.
Twice as much. But again, this is liable to be changed, right? This is the current state of the world. And we are going to make sure that you're able to figure this out beforehand. with tools in the app or with the match entry process to know.
Because they kept saying there was a 5 times weighting factor for tournament results.
So the old algo had a 5x rating, right? Okay. And again, it was something that was set, it was established, and it was just, this is the belief. There wasn't a lot of research. And I, as a stats guy, am very keen on making sure that these numbers are at least representing some truth, have some, rationale behind them. So I want to investigate these. I want to put these under a lot more scrutiny, put them under the microscope, and get to the exact values. I want to be able to change them freely to whatever updates the information the most correctly. But again, if I don't tell users before they experience the match, or at least provide them with that opportunity to check, this is what's going to happen when I play this match, then I can't freely move these parameters around. But the goal from this is, I could see it being anywhere from where it is right now, which is sort of like closer to 2x to 5x. Anything in that range could make sense over what we want that weight. But again, what we're going to look at is, what is the thing that maximizes how predictive DUPR is, and allows us to communicate it clearly and transparently before the match is entered.
Any difference between a sanctioned tournament result and a non-sanctioned tournament result?
So I would have to kind of see how that shows up in the data. I would imagine no. Like I think right now that, like, if a club just decides they want to put on a tournament, that's going to be from an official source. And really the ratio as it was defined before, that the old 5x, right, that we were talking about, the 5x multiplier that you've heard before, that was really mostly designed to limit the spoofing possibility, to limit the ability for somebody to put in just a bunch of arbitrary matches and not be caught. Now closer to 2x, it's thinking about, okay, this is really the, if all of these matches are true, this is maybe more correct in terms of the predictive quality of, okay, this match should be weighted twice as much versus half as much. But there's some balancing that still needs to be done. And I think the important takeaway here is all of the numbers that update behind the scenes for DUPR ought to be flexible, ought to be fluid. They ought to be able to be fit to the data in a way that is best for the statistical process. And the important thing is we say, this is what could happen if you win or lose beforehand. And as to your suggestion, which I think is a great idea, providing that little bit of information for the user that says, hey, this is sort of the higher level idea of why. You're a new player, so it's going to move more than the established player. This is a pro bracket might have a different level than a non-pro bracket. We may want to introduce that at some point. So like having those tooltips available to users who want to go and investigate, oh, if I beat this next opponent, what's my DUPR going to be? That should be available. They should be able to pull that up in a tournament, plug it in, see the result, and then go play, and then see that outcome represented.
What if I play against a non-rated player, a DUPR that is a player that's currently just has non-rated?
So we have recently changed the format of this because it was causing a lot of frustration with the change over to the new algo. Everybody was coming in at a 3.5. And so there were some people who were actually 5.0s coming in at 3.5s, and they had to work their way up. And in the process, we're taking DUPRs away from everybody who they were competing with. And similarly, there were people who were actually 2.0s coming in at 3.5, and everyone was feeling, hey, I've worked my butt off to be a 3, and this person just entered right now and has become a 3.5. So the way that we've changed this, and it's still like the user interface is being updated to more cleanly represent this, but what's going on behind the scenes is that when I play a new match, let's say I'm a brand new player, if I play 3 matches where everybody else on the court during those matches has a DUPR, tomorrow morning I'll wake up with a DUPR that is now the best guess based on where and how I played against those people. And those 3 people that I played against will not experience any sort of downside for having played with me, nor will they experience upside. It won't affect their ratings. The only person whose rating is going to get affected by that match is the not rated player. And the reason we did this is so that there's all of the information of that match goes into creating the rating for that non-rated player, such that they can then, be level set at the right value. So let's say I play with 3 different 5.0s, right? They don't want me to be a 3.5 because if I'm actually at the level of a 5.0, I could bring down some of their ratings. Let's say I win a couple matches, that's going to hurt the people that I beat. So what this is going to do is, okay, let's say I play perfectly neutral pickleball. I'm like, I win half my matches, lose half my matches, right? Against a bunch of 5-0s. I'll get initialized as a 5-0 because that's kind of where I fit in to that scheme. No matter who I played with, we always were sort of half winning, half losing. And so I am going to come in as a 5-0 tomorrow morning. Right. But then this is, you have to actually demonstrate that you can play that way, right? Like we're going to look at the match results and we're going to evaluate this, right? Most people are playing with people their own level. In fact, the vast majority of players are playing with people their own level.
True.
And when you pair this with the idea that early matches for newer players are soon going to be weighted more, meaning they're going to move you more. If I come in a 5-0 and at my first match, it's very clear I'm not a 5-0, I might move all the way down to a 4. Right? Because it's going to have a ton of variance in that initial match of, okay, this was clearly a wrong starting point. But what we've seen in terms of the kind of like increase in accuracy for players that have just been initialized is tremendous. It jumped a huge amount. You can obviously expect that. You're playing 3.5, and even if you get initialized at like 3.7, the amount of additional accuracy you get from those 0.2 just by starting better.
No self-rating from the player.
No self-ratings.
Got it.
So the only instance in which a rating, used to be able to sort of adopt ratings from the league. If you were playing in a 4.0 league, it would kind of like start you thinking maybe you're close to a 4.0 with a very loose description of what that means. Like you could go anywhere. That's sort of, we're trying to weight how important that is in our process. So right now there's no, if you play in an event that says this is an event for 4.5, none of that information communicates to you unless, again, this is just if you're a new rated player. None of your information communicates to you unless the people that you're playing in that 4.5 event are all 4.5s, right? Then it's like, okay, I'm adopting the information from the people I'm playing with and the level of play I had against them, right?
So going forward, no player's rating will be adjusted if someone on the court is a non-rated player.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And
did it used to?
No, this is new. It used to be. So because when you were a non-rated player, we assumed you were a 3-5, right? And that's clearly wrong.
Right.
So now what we do is we say, we don't know. Why don't you play some matches? So I just want to clarify one quick thing though, because I had said if you play 3 matches with all rated people, you'll get it initialized when you wake up the next morning. If you play matches with people who aren't all rated, right? Some are rated, some are not. For the people who are rated, you're still not going to feel anything. It's still going to be like you're just helping other people get ratings, but it's going to take more of those matches for the non-rated people to get rated because there's less information in that match, right? Let's say all 4 people are unrated. You're going to need a lot of those matches to really figure out where you are. And even then, you're only really ever going to show up between a 3 and a 4. We're never going to give somebody a rating of a 5 or a 2 just because we don't know the level of play of all the other people, right? We're basing that information purely off of this closed community of 4 unrated people playing each other a bunch of times. So
I see the stats. What I don't understand is the half-life. What is the half-life in the stats that are displayed?
So half-life is a holdover from the previous algo that we still think is informational. But think about half-life as measuring the number of matches you've played if after something like 90 days, the weight of that match gets cut in half, right? If you're familiar with that idea of carbon dating, I've made that analogy before where it's like this thing is decaying over time, right? I play a match today, it's worth 1. 90 days from now, that same match is now only worth a half. And it sort of decays gradually over time, right? 180 days, that match is only worth a quarter. So the way that we used to evaluate whether somebody was reliable and had an accurate rating was, do you have a half-life greater than 3? Have you either just played 3 matches or have you been playing matches consistently enough that the weight of all of those decayed matches is greater than 3? There's enough information still in the system. We're moving to another format, and Steve Kuhn, our CEO, was on the Pickle Pod and gave a little bit of an overview, maybe about a month or 2 ago, where he talks about this idea called the reliability score. So we're looking to advance that idea of half-life to become more aware of the ecosystem of pickleball. It's not just the number of matches you played and how close those matches are to today, but also who you played with. Did you play against people who had reliable ratings? Did you play against people who've, played in pro tournaments before? Those people are going to have very reliable information, right? If you play informed ratings, you get more informed yourself. There's more information transferred to you. And so we're adapting this to kind of take into consideration a lot of the statistical work that has been done already, especially like early internet. Think about Google's PageRank. How do you determine who goes at the top of a search? It's how many other websites link to that page, right? How many other websites and how reliable are those websites? And you build this sort of broad algorithm. So that's what we're going to try to do with
Are you saying that the half-life of the players you competed against in a given match was being used to affect your rating, but it's not now?
Other way. So so actually the half-life of who you played against was never a factor.
Oh.
It was always just how many matches have you played? And what we're going to do is think about this from a network perspective. How many matches have you played, and how many matches has that person played? And how many matches have that person played against people who have played lots of matches, right? How, if I am playing somebody who is in Major League Pickleball, I'm probably going to have a pretty good idea of my score after I play them, because it's going to be, they're so informed with their score. We know so much about them, right? That it's going to infer a lot more about me. But if I play somebody who has only played 1 or 2 matches on DUPR, I'm not going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a little bit because it's one more data point, but I'm not going to learn as much. So not all matches are created equal from an information standpoint. And we want to represent that as well, right? To get to the truth behind what all of this is.
A question I get a lot is, because we're all used to the UTPR and WPR, and there used to be a mixed rating versus, for me, for example, would be a men's rating, doubles rating. Why does DUPR not consider 2 different ratings between mixed and non-mixed?
Yeah, so that's actually a question we get a lot as well. And I think we've been able to fine tune our answer through that. So let's kind of step back and talk about some of the problems that exist in the ratings community that then bubble up into the answer to this question. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. Trust me that we're going to the right place here. Okay. The first thing is what we call a population problem. Connectivity. How does one community and one population connect to another community and another population? How do we learn relative level of play between people of Spain and the people of the US? There's not a lot of people flying over to Spain playing, pickleball, or not a lot of people coming from Spain coming over here and playing. There certainly are, but in terms of the population size, that number is very small. So there's a piece of information, a relative piece of information that isn't as transparent, which is, okay, there is a quality of play, a 3.0 in Spain. DUPR needs to try to make sure, to the best of our ability, that they match up to a 3.0 in the US, and a 4.0 in Spain matches up to a 4.0 in the US. We want to make sure that it's consistent in this. And so we try to take as many different paths as we can to get there, looking at, maybe someone in Spain plays someone in the UK, and UK and the US has a lot of overlap. And so we're able to kind of like go around the corner and define those relationships in a way that is not kind of immediately obvious, right? The network is connected, even if it's not directly connected. This is an ideal case. Obviously, travel makes that really hard. Another set of populations we have is the male players and the female players. And so there are distinct tournaments, and we would in fact love to see tournaments that are, and we host tournaments that are gender non-specific and allow you to just create a team of a DUPR up to this score, right? And that's kind of where we'd like to see this sport going. But the idea of the men and women playing together, right? We only get a handful of events relative to the entire population that tell us the relative level of play of the male and female population. So we mixed doubles, for instance, does not communicate the relative level of play of the men versus the women on the court, because there's an even amount of both, right, on each team. But if we were to see 2 men play against 2 women, or we were to see 2 men play against a woman and a man, or we were to see 2 women play against a woman and a man, now we'd start to build information, because there's this imbalance on the court that allows us to inform the rest of this community. So we do have quite a bit of those matches, and we do predict those matches with reasonably high predictive power, right? Something like 97% as accurate when looking at what we think the score of those matches is going to be versus something like a traditional men's, women's, or mixed pairing, right? So there is this idea of all of these different communities existing in the populations, and some of them are harder to connect than others. But the male and female populations have actually been surprisingly more capable of connection than something like how does someone in Australia relate to somebody in the US? So there are harder population problems that the community has sort of decided aren't a problem. A male in Australia and a male in the US, they've sort of decided, oh, they must be on the same page. But that's actually a harder problem. And in fact, it's a problem that we're working on solving. And we wish we could get it to the point of the relative male and female populations and being able to disentangle those and have a good understanding. So to start this off, we feel we have a pretty good relative ability to predict the kind of like gender dynamic in our data set. We have enough examples that do a good job of connecting a lot of those dots. We'd love to have more. We'd love for the sport to move in that direction and really build out some of that. But I don't know if you watched the Major League Pickleball, but there's that dream breaker concept at the end where it's like any two people on the team can match up and it's a singles match. We've realized DUPR does a pretty good job of using the singles scores to predict the ability of those players, even when it's a male versus female competing, playing singles. So from a predictive power standpoint, we feel like we do a reasonable job there. Let's talk a little bit about, like, I'll often get the comment, a 5.0 male and a 5.0 female, the male's going to win 90% of the time, which we don't see in the data. We don't believe. That's not how we think about this. For two reasonably well-connected players, a 5.0 and a 5.0, doesn't matter the other characteristics, right? Think about 5.0 as describing the likelihood you are to win a point against a random person, out there in the wild. You might win because you're a great dinker. I might win because I run around like a maniac with my head chopped off and am able to get almost everything back over the net. We might end up winning the same percentage of points against a variety of different peoples and a variety of different level of play. But in the end, the way that we go about doing that is different. That same applies to a lot of the arguments that made against male and female players. So male players maybe on average are taller, on average maybe have more power on their overhead smash, but a 5.0, I'm a short guy. Me, if I was a 5.0 playing against another 5.0 male, I must have gotten there a different way. I must have gotten there because I'm more strategic with my dinks or more capable of, using my worse, if I'm forehand dominant, backhand dominant, I might be more capable of being switchable there and able to kind of like take advantage of my backhand, let's say, versus somebody who's just more of a power player. So the second important idea is that a 5.0 is not a 5.0 or a 4.0, whatever that number, it's trying to encapsulate all the different ways you can get there, right? And yes, in a particular matchup, player A and player B, one of their advantages might outweigh the advantages of the other in that particular matchup. But the reason you get to a 5.0 is because you've been able to demonstrate against players of similar ratings that you're able to hold your own. And it doesn't matter how you get there. So let's talk about the last thing that brings this all together, the idea of role in match play. So a left side versus right side role is a common one, but we also have seen it referred to as alpha and beta, right? You have your alpha player on the left in a typical two righty situation and your beta player on the right. And the alpha player can take up a lot more of the court than the beta player, in particular because that center of the court is their forehand and is going to be more likely their dominant side. So that we see is not, it's a instance that, or it's an occurrence that we see a lot more in mixed, right? At the higher level of play, especially, but even throughout all the different tiers of pickleball, more often than not, the male player is a higher rated than the female player. It just has to do with the depth of talent and how we sort of see all of this relative play shaking out. But if I was to play doubles with Ben Johns, to use him again as an example, you can imagine I'm going to be on the right side and he's going to be taking up a lot of court. So what we've decided is a more accurate way of doing this, rather than thinking about mixed versus traditional gender doubles, is thinking about what is the level of play gap between the people on a team and how does an individual respond to that? So if a player is like Ben Johns, he's very capable of playing with a partner who's just as good as him. He's also very capable of playing with a partner who's much worse than him, and he'll adapt and he'll take more of that court. Whereas maybe a more junior player, someone who's just starting to play, they're a 3.5 and their partner's a 2.5, that might be more like, okay, well, 80% of the points are going to be off of the paddle of that 2.5 player because the 3.5 doesn't yet know how to take over that court. So really the nature of role and how two players on a court interact is more generalizable than simply a particular phenomenon we're seeing with gender double or mixed doubles play. There is a strong side player and a weak side player, and the ability of that strong side player to take over the court is important, but we often see mixed doubles matches where players are equal weight, right? And it can be a very different outcome, and it looks more like they're playing their style that they would in a gender doubles match. So there's a particular phenomenon of what are the ratings we tend to see. There's a particular phenomenon, what are the rating pairings we tend to see on a team? There's a particular phenomenon of how connected are these communities? And those two things both happen to rear their head in mixed doubles, but we actually think those are two separate problems that we can solve in a more generalizable and sophisticated way that allow the sport to continue to grow and be more fluid in how they make gender pairings. And we can do these, pick your 4 players, the sum of the DUPRs can't be more than 16. And now it's this team building exercise that's really fun. How do you want to combine those different DUPRs based on what you know about role and dominance and based on what you know about how these players interact with each other? And so I think that becomes a more exciting end state for the game when we're thinking about these things in terms of the roles that you take on a court. And then from a statistical standpoint, how do we intersect all these communities and make sure that that information is flowing through it? So hopefully you're at least a little bit more of a believer in the chance that, maybe we should be separating these things out. But internally at DUPR, we feel pretty strongly that there are better ways of representing these problems rather than forcibly separating the traditional doubles from the mixed doubles, because we want to allow for this sport to grow beyond that.
Yeah, it's a tough decision. I think I understand where you're coming from. However, on the flip side, a lot of times a mixed team will, if their results for their mixed results would end up giving them a lower DUPR rating or lower rating, let's say, versus their competition non-mixed. And it sort of allows to some degree that the mixed play to be played at one skill level, let's say 3-5 versus 4-0 at the non-mixed level. And when they're combined, it prevents the play in competition because you typically have to play at the highest skill level of
right. So let's kind of work this example. So we have a player who's very good when they're splitting a court with somebody, and let's say not very good when they're having to dominate the court, right? Like if you're a dominant left side player on a mixed doubles and you lose more than you'd be expecting to, and when you're when you're on the left side with somebody who's basically the same DUPR as you and you're kind of sharing that court, okay, that's the peak of, in this particular case, this individual's abilities. And they're sort of able to say, all right, I can really dominate my half, but if I have to take 75% of the court, I start to give up too much on my backhand, maybe, right? Like I don't really know how to split that. So I think you're absolutely right in that this poses a problem if people's relative abilities are different, but I think that's up to us to fix from a understanding how this particular individual plays in their roles and making an adjustment or making a modifier that says, when this player is the dominant player on a court by more than 0.5 DUPR, like when their DUPR is 0.5 higher than their partners or something like that, their ability is not the same. Their average performance of that team is not what you'd normally expect. Whereas if you're paired with somebody in this case, then maybe you're more like the predicted DUPR quality of that team is representative of their play. So I think that what we could do is we could shortcut it and just say, okay, we're going to split these things up and solve it later. But I'd be worried that that puts a wall in front of us that makes it very hard to scale and get beyond that ever. And so I would like to get to a point where we are trying first to address that role problem and being able to say, like, hey, this player has an adjustment on their score. If they're playing in a and people organizing mixed tournaments can use this factor, right? You can say, hey, you need to have a DUPR that when you look at your like role dominant modifier or whatever, right? We need to think about exactly how we do this. But that idea of when you're playing in a format that is going to create this dynamic between players on a team, that we need to investigate it differently, whether it's with partners of the same quality or same gender and different quality, or whether it's the different gender and different quality. Like ultimately, we'd like to be able to boil your average ability to win a point down into a number. And if we need to start thinking about other pieces of information we can add to help refine that, which is how much of the court are you being expected to take over, and does that kind of like overtax you? That I think is where I'd love to go from like kind of a holistic brain process. It feels like, okay, that's the right way to understand the sport. And then in terms of how it gets applied, perhaps right now it's going to get applied specifically to mixed and specifically to traditional gender doubles, but it doesn't kind of prohibit us from growing to that point in the future.
Okay, here's some other questions. Pickleball brackets, which we've all had to transition from pickleball tournaments to pickleball brackets, doesn't seem to be integrated with DUPR yet. Is there a schedule for that integration? Because all the tournament directors like myself, we have to manually submit the data to DUPR.
So there's only so much I can comment on this because of background legal things that have made this very dicey. So me just being the data guy, I'm working mostly with the data that I'm getting, and I'm making the best of it if we can. And there's definitely been some hiccups, and a lot of people have been very frustrated. So I can't go too much in the weeds on exactly what to expect from that interaction. I sympathize with you. I know it's been frustrating. We've made it to the best of our ability, provided the tools and the APIs, the interactive components that pickleball brackets would need to integrate. There's just other things going on right now that I both don't know enough about to comment and probably couldn't comment on directly. We are acknowledging it and we're working towards it. There's a lot of moving parts in pickleball right now, and right now we're trying to plan the best we can for making this as easy as possible going down the line. But there's other actors, there's other roadblocks, and we're just trying to deliver what we can. We believe we've given everything we can in order to make this work. I'll put it like that.
I do find this occasionally that players end up with duplicate DUPR accounts. I believe it's some of that not manual entry, but the submission, those spreadsheets that the tournament directors have to submit might end up creating a duplicate. So that's a known issue that you do have.
It's a known issue. If you or your listeners have duplicate accounts, the best thing to do is raise it to support. Support right now is, and a lot of people are frustrated with support. They're sort of assuming you're getting ignored. You're not getting ignored. We get 150 to 200 support requests per day, right? We're not a huge organization. We don't have this
email
massive team.
If somebody has a problem with their DUPR?
I will send it. It's probably like support@mydupr. I don't have that off the top of my head. I'll send it to you at the end, and we can kind of put that where it needs to be so people can follow it. But yeah, support will work. We'll work as hard as we can to go through that. Hopefully the support burden goes down and down as we make these changes and people get more familiar with what the algorithm is doing. In the meantime, if your listeners have a comment they want to run through you and you can forward it to me, I can try to, pull some strings and get things expedited here.
It looks like the mobile DUPR app is now showing the modification per match, but the web version, is that correct?
Yeah, so the goal is to do the web too. We just had to release one by one, and more people were logging in on their phone more regularly. So we kind of prioritized the fix there. And there's also just a number of different tournament and club focused things that we're putting all into one release for the website. So the website should be getting an update. I can't speak exactly to when, but it's going to start looking more like the phone interface going forward. And the goal to kind of like modernize, show more relevant information, and kind of get everything in one page in one kind of view is the goal. I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but it's, people are working on it pretty diligently, like every meeting every day on what that should look like and how it should work.
Great. Okay, Scott, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for doing this interview.
Yeah, I appreciate your time as well. And to the extent, just I want to offer this out to you and your listeners. We know we need to be better about communicating. This is step one. I'd love step two to also include you and your listeners. And to the extent there's questions, feedback, I'm doing a Reddit AMA for those of your users who are familiar with Reddit. I'm doing that on Thursday at 2 p.m. If this is out before then, they can ask questions. But if not, to the extent that you would feel comfortable, they can send you questions. And if there's another batch of questions that your listeners would need answered, I'd be happy to make a reappearance and go through those again with you.
Right.
The goal here is for everyone to believe in the direction we're going, understand the problems that we've had, and we understand the problems that we've had, and we're trying to address them. And I think this is meant to be built with the community in mind, and I'd want the community to be a part of it, and that includes you and your community. So thank you again for having me. Thanks for reaching out to schedule this. It's great talking to you, and hope we can do it again soon.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
And if you want to support my channel, here's my Pickleball's Life clothing line with fleece jackets, quarter zips, racerbacks, t-shirts, shorts, hats, visors, and sport towels. Purchase them online or order them during tournament registration. Another way you can support my channel is to use the Amazon product links I have in the description of the video. There's no cost to you or added cost, or you can go to my Amazon storefront and select a product. And check out my Pickleball Venues Google map. There's a link in the description. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, all I ask is that you please subscribe by clicking on the top left and share this video with your friends. If you want to see some other pickleball videos, they're here in the center. My other YouTube channel, Tesla Life, is on the bottom left. Check it out. My Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts are listed on the right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.